Luis Moreno-Ocampo is the chief prosecutor of the International Criminal Court. And this week, he announced that he wants to arrest Colonel Gaddafi for crimes against humanity. Well, Luis Moreno-Ocampo is going to be live on World Have Your Say for the next hour, answering your questions about that decision and about any other queries you have about the work of the ICC. All the contact details are going to be on the screen throughout. Already people are asking, is the ICC anti-African? Others saying, if you're going after the leader of Libya, why not the leaders of Syria and Yemen? No subjects are off limits. He's live for the whole hour. Luis Moreno-Ocampo on World Have Your Say. Let's get you talking with him. And if you want to phone up and speak to Luis Moreno-Ocampo, the number to call is country code 44 2070 83 72 72. We'll do our very best to get as many of you on the air as we can. Also, if you're online and want to tweet as you watch the programme, do remember to put the WHYS hashtag with your tweets and we'll pick up all of your messages. But before we bring him in, let's catch up with the main news of the day, starting with President Obama, who's due to meet the Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu in the White House shortly. They're going to discuss the president's wide-ranging speech yesterday on the future of the Middle East. Now, a key clause has already been dismissed by the Israeli leader, the declaration that a future Palestinian state should be based on the borders that existed before the 1967 war. Mr. Netanyahu says they are indefensible. There have been more anti-government protests in several places across Syria. This footage appears to show protests in a suburb of Damascus earlier today. Reports also say Syrian security forces fired into crowds in the central city of Homs, while thousands have been demonstrating in the coastal city of Banias. Meanwhile, as I say, every Friday on World Have Your Say, thousands of Yemenis have taken to the streets to protest against the rule of President Ali Abdullah Saleh. The president has called for early elections, saying he wants to end the bloodshed, but he's continuing to resist the idea of leaving office immediately. The president of TEPCO, which operates Japan's crippled Fukushima nuclear power plant, has resigned. The company reported huge losses of more than $15 billion following March's earthquake and tsunami. Masataka Shimizu said he was taking responsibility for Japan's nuclear crisis. And Italian police have rescued about 500 migrants packed onto a fishing boat just south of the small Italian island of Lampedusa. The migrants came from sub-Saharan Africa and were mostly men, but there were also 36 women and 9 children on board. Well, let me welcome Luis Moreno-Ocampo to World Have Your Say. Sir, thank you very much indeed for your time.
Thank you very much for inviting me.
Well, we've got any amount of comments coming in from around the world. Let's begin with an email from Ali in Tripoli, who says, the people of Tripoli are incredibly motivated by your stance towards the crimes committed by the regime. What options do we have in Libya to ensure that these arrest warrants are enforced?
It's a very good question, because I think Libya case is a new model in which it's not just a military intervention, but the world is doing something. It's not just one country, it's all the world together. That, for me, is the most important thing. Security Council was unanimous in referring the Libya situation to the ICC. And now we request an arrest warrant to the judges, and we have time to discuss how to implement them, how to implement it, because the judges can accept or reject the arrest warrant. But the question, as you say, if the judges issue the arrest warrant, how will implement it? And there are different options that should be studied and developed. One first option for me, and probably the easier and the best, is that people around Gaddafi arrest him. How to do it? We have to discuss it, or they have to discuss it. But you have to think, Gaddafi was ruling by fear. And the fear is going now, is living.
So, sir, just so I'm clear, your preferred option is for people close to Colonel Gaddafi to arrest him rather than foreigners go into Libya and try and carry out the arrest?
To keep the consensus, in security, I was in the Security Council a few weeks ago, and it's clear India, China, Russia will support, protect civilians, but they don't like a military intervention in Libya. So the best idea will be implement. There's a judicial decision. It's a judge deciding that arrest warrant will be implemented. Then the Libyans have to take the lead. How is a different matter. One option could be people around Gaddafi turning around him and arresting him. No more fear of Gaddafi.
Well,
other options are for him.
Oh, sorry, carry on, sir. Carry on.
The rebels in Benghazi are sending notes to us saying they will arrest Gaddafi. They will do it. And they say, we like to take the lead. Eventually, if you need international cooperation, we'll request. But they want to take the lead. That's a different options. And then maybe other options are.
Well, there are going to be
in
people,
the meantime,
so there are going to be people watching you in Libya right now. If you are watching BBC World News in Libya, do you agree that the best option here is for Libyans to carry out that arrest? By all means, call us. We'll call you back. Country code 44 2070 83 72 72. The next point for you, sir, is going to come from Eamon, who joins us live from Nairobi. Eamon, go ahead.
Hello, Mr. Ocampo.
Hello?
Hello. I would like to ask you a question.
Yes.
Now, since we know that you've been pursuing a warrant of arrest against Gaddafi, and now you want to say that you want the Libyan people those people who are around Gaddafi, to go after him and arrest him, how do you expect that? That's a very long shot. It's a very long shot. And the probability of success is like 10%. How do you expect to achieve that? I mean, as of now, we know that your term of office is coming to an end. You have like 12 months minimal. How do you want to achieve this? I mean, you have a pending warrant of arrest against al-Bashir of Sudan. I mean, how are you supposed to achieve all this? How do you expect to do all this work?
Let me start first saying, it's not about me. This is an institution. It's a court with 18 judges. In my office, there are 300 people working. There are 115 states members of this treaty. So this is not me, it's the institution. So whatever the court decides will be implemented after my retirement. So this is not about me. So that's the first point. We are setting a new rules in the world. ICC is an important part of this new setting. And it's not about me, it's about the court and the state supporting and individuals as you in Kenya watching and discussing what's happening in Libya. That's the new situation. In Libya, as I said before, this one option could be the same regime turning around him and arresting him. Because that's why I insist. Gaddafi distrusts deeply his people. Gaddafi, for instance, he put the ammunitions not in the same barrack where the tanks were. So he distrusts his army, he distrusts his police. That's why he ruled the country with his own sons and some relatives. So, and people was afraid of him, and they should.
Mr. Moreno-Ocampo, let me just jump in here, though, because the point Eamon raises is being raised by lots of people, and it's concern about the speed at which the ICC works. Do you have frustrations that you cannot bring cases to a conclusion faster?
No, we have 5 prisoners in The Hague. So there are people arrested on trial, will be convictions. Today was the end of the first trial. So now we're going to the closing argument, will be decision. So some cases are moving faster. The problem is the court rely on the armies and the police of the world. So the Belgian police arrest Jean-Pierre Bemba in one day. But in Sudan, of course, the government of Sudan police is not arresting the president of Sudan. So that's why it requires a different approach. Each case has a different approach. Libya approach is different. Libyans are very proud to do it themselves. The rebels in the south say, we will do it, we'll implement the arrest warrant. That's a possibility. Other people inside Tripoli could do it. Of course, it's not easy, it's complex, but it's feasible. And for me, the point is, I'm not in charge to arrest, I'm the prosecutor, but the possibility now is to study how to do it.
But that's an interesting point that you say the problem isn't with the institution of the ICC, the problem is with the systems on which the ICC depends in various countries. If you're watching and you have frustrations about the speed at which the ICC moves, does that to some extent put your mind at rest? Do get in touch, worldhaveyourSay.com. Let's quickly bring back Eamon in Nairobi, because of course there are 6 Kenyan politicians being charged at the ICC. Eamon, are you satisfied with the speed at which their cases are moving?
No, I'm not satisfied with the speed of which the cases are moving. It is moving very slow. As I've already said, that the process of bringing people to justice It takes a long time. It takes a very long time. And the process is very slow. I think they have to do something about that.
Eamon, thank you very much indeed for joining us live from Nairobi. Now, let's bring up a message from Jefferson in Nigeria, posted on facebook.com/World Have Your Say. This for Luis Moreno-Ocampo. He says, are rebel leaders and NATO forces who hit non-military targets in Libya immune from prosecution?
No. No. Any group committing war crimes could be investigated. We are waiting to have a Commission of Inquiry report, which is coming beginning of June, because they were in Tripoli, they were in Benghazi. We'll see their findings. We will investigate any war crimes committed by any party.
Jefferson in Nigeria, thanks for that question. Let's bring in Ibrahim, who's a British Libyan living in London. Ibrahim, welcome to the programme. What's your question?
Thank you. Mr. Ocampo, the people that surround Colonel Gaddafi are also implicated in the crimes committed by his regime and therefore are highly unlikely to arrest him. In fact, they should be targeted for arrest warrants themselves. Are there any plans to issue further warrants for arrest for people such as Nasser Mabruk?
We'll see. Yesterday, 2 days ago, I read the Deputy Minister of Foreign Affairs was saying that Libya will not implement the arrest warrant because they are not members of the Rome Treaty. So I sent a letter to him, to the Minister of Foreign Affairs in Libya today, saying, look, you should implement the arrest warrant because you are a member of the UN, and the Security Council referred this case. If you are not doing that, or in particular, if you are covering up the crimes, we will prosecute you, Minister of Foreign Affairs, or ambassadors. So now we are investigating how diplomats and Minister of Foreign Affairs are working. If they are part of the cover-up of the crimes, we will investigate them. So that's what we can do. We can keep investigating and trying to issue arrest warrants against those who are supporting the regime.
Ibrahim, do you want to respond?
Yes, please. I'd like to say that no matter how many warrants are issued, it remains a symbolic gesture if they are not enforceable. And given your stance that the international forces do not have a mandate to enforce these warrants, how can these warrants be enforced? The Libyan people are not currently in a situation where they can necessarily enforce these themselves. And given that the issue of these warrants now makes the possibility of a negotiated exit more unlikely, it's very important that these warrants are in fact enforced. And I wonder if you will go forward and approach the UN Security Council for a further resolution to allow international forces to enforce these warrants.
Well, Ibrahim, there's a number of people getting into the area you're talking about, which is whether these requests for arrest warrants actually may get in the way of finding a solution in Libya. We've got to pause for a couple of minutes, so I'll let Luis Moreno-Ocampo consider how he wants to respond to that point, and we'll hear his response in a couple of minutes' time. Hi, I'm Ros Atkins. Thanks for coming back with us on World Have Your Say. Our guest for the entire hour is the Chief Prosecutor of the International Criminal Court, Luis Moreno-Ocampo. He's happy to answer any questions you have about the workings of the court. All the contact details are on the screen all of the time. I can see calls are coming in from Mauritius, Libya, New Zealand, Malawi, Australia, Saudi Arabia, Germany and Indonesia. Keep them coming. We'll get as many of you on the air as we can. But first of all, Mr. Moreno-Ocampo, Ibrahim, a British Libyan, was asking you whether asking for these arrest warrants may actually make resolving the conflict in Libya harder because it removes an option for Colonel Gaddafi. There's no option for him to negotiate a departure.
That is not true. There are different options now. If the court issued an arrest warrant, national Libyan people could try to implement it, but also the Libyans can request support to international forces. That's the way. I should not request international intervention. The Libyans can request support. And on negotiations, I'm a prosecutor. I should not be involved in political negotiations. But the Security Council can. Security Council is the political body here, and they can negotiate, and even they can suspend my investigation for 1 year. So there's plenty of options. The arrest warrant presents a new option. Between bombing and between nothing, now we can do justice in Libya.
Well, we've got lots of comments on Libya. We'll come back to some of them in a little while. But first of all, let's bring in Blaise, who's on the phone from Johannesburg. Blaise got in touch through Facebook, and we got back once the phone number had been provided. Blaise, good to have you on the show. What's your question?
All right. I've got about 4 questions to ask Mr. Luis Moreno. So my first question is why Luis Moreno can't determine the numbers of people killed in Libya? Why can't determine the number of people killed in Syria and Palestine as well? Because the uprising has started. I think it can last about 2 months.
Blaise, I'm going to jump in. I'm not happy with the quality of the phone line, but I can hear it well enough to know that you were asking Mr. Moreno-Ocampo why intervene in Libya but not intervene in Syria.
Okay.
Mr. Ocampo?
I don't know if you can show this map, but this map shows that my jurisdiction is not in the world. I can intervene independently in all the dark blue countries. These countries are the members of the Rome Treaty, of the International Criminal Court Treaty. Outside these dark blue countries, I cannot intervene except the UN Security Council authorized me to intervene. So, and they did it in Libya and in Darfur. It is true they did not in other situations, but it is their prerogative. They decide, not me. So request me to intervene in Yemen is to request a South African prosecutor to intervene in Yemen. They cannot do it. I cannot do it. I am not the world prosecutor. I am the prosecutor of 115 states parties.
Well, OK, I take your point, Mr. Moreno-Ocampo, but in which case, are you frustrated that the UN hasn't asked you to intervene in Syria in the way that you have in Libya?
No, I'm a prosecutor. I understand.
I appreciate you're a prosecutor. You still experience emotions, though. You still know what's happening in Syria. Just today, we've got demonstrations in Homs and in Damascus. People are being fired on by troops. Don't you wish you could investigate that, prosecute the people involved?
No, first, I think the world is changing. So it's like half of the glass is empty, half is full. So, okay, I'm working in Libya. I think in Libya there are serious crimes. It's an opportunity to work together and to protect civilians there. If we achieve that, this will evolve. Then there will be other cases. I think we have to achieve a good result in Libya and then move on.
Let's bring in Goni in Nigeria, who, like many of you, got in touch through Facebook and we got his phone number. Goni, go ahead. What's your question?
My question to Mr. Ocampo is that he is so much obsessed about prosecuting African and Muslim leaders in particular. Why is he not prosecuting or not even making any move to see that leaders such as Israelis and Sri Lankan, where war crimes have been committed, according to many international human rights reports, he is not going there. He started talking about Cote d'Ivoire, about Laurent Gbagbo, before any UN mandate. He started talking about Libyan President Colonel Gaddafi before the UN mandate. To me, he is just obsessed in humiliating African and Muslim leaders. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you for this question. I am working for Africans. All the victims in Libya are Africans. The victims in Cote d'Ivoire are African. The victims in Darfur are Africans. So we are working for African victims. In Rwanda, when the genocide happened, the world ignored African victims. That was a shame. I will not do the same. I will not ignore African victims because they are Africans. Why I'm not working in Sri Lanka or in Israel? Again, let me go back to the map. You see Sri Lanka dark blue or not? Then I cannot do it. Do you see Israel dark blue or not? Lebanon, Iraq, Burma, Zimbabwe, all these countries are not members, so I cannot intervene. So that's why the explanation to your point, why I'm in Africa, is because in Africa they need me. The victims need me. The victims need, and in Africa, leaders like the president of Cote d'Ivoire, Mr. Ouattara, request my intervention. So I am helping African leaders to stop crimes against Africans.
And you're quite right, sir. Alison Watterer has asked for your assistance. Will you be prosecuting some of the people involved?
Can you repeat?
Will you be getting involved in Ivory Coast? Will you be investigating and seeking the arrest of some of those involved in the violence after the election?
We are working on Ivory Coast case, yes. We are going to request an open investigation in Côte d'Ivoire, yes.
OK, thank you very much indeed for your response. Goni, we appreciate you getting in touch on Facebook and for coming up on Skype as well. Let's shift from Nigeria to Uganda. Matthew is with us from Kampala. Matthew, what's your point?
My question, thank you very much. I have a question. I also have an observation.
Well, let's start with the question, Matthew, and we'll take it from there.
My question is, it's about the famous Ocampo 6 in Kenya. I'm so much disturbed because the hotspots, for example, Kibera in Nairobi, I'm not seeing any of the 6 who was involved in there, who is in the Ocampo 6. How did he calculate and get the Ocampo 6, and yet there's no one in Kibera who is involved?
OK, so you say, how did you end up prosecuting these 6 people? You're saying, you know, Kibera, the famous slum on the outskirts of Nairobi. You say none of the people involved in the violence there have been prosecuted. Mr. Moreno-Ocampo, how did you decide on those 6?
On the contrary, we include the attacks in Kibera in the case, and we consider Secretary General Motaura and Chief Police Ali were allowing or ordering the police to use lethal force against people in Kibera. So we include the Kibera case as one of the incidents that we request to be investigated and prosecuted. And we consider the Chief of the Police and the Secretary General of the government were involved in authorizing the use of violence against civilians in Kibera. So it's specifically included in my request. Thank you for the question.
Thanks for the question, Matthew. Let me quickly put this one to you. Bill Notty, posting on the Kenyan Daily Nation website, says, this job of yours must give you high blood pressure. I wonder, is it stressful?
No, in fact, for me, it's the most interesting jobs in the world. I had to try to help people who are attacked, women raped, to do justice for them. It's an honor.
I can see we've got calls getting a huge response from 23 countries so far: Mozambique, Gambia, Ghana. I just wonder if you could respond to this point from Dee in the United States on Facebook, who says, what one thing would you change about the ICC?
Myself? No, I think that we are just in the beginning. We are just in the beginning of this idea, the idea to have an international criminal court who is up and running and ready to intervene. That's why we talk about the speed. We received this request to intervene in Libya 2.5 months ago. And now we have another warrant with full of evidence. So we are better and better each day. So I think the court is evolving, and the meaning of the court is now people understand, because that's the point. Few cases in The Hague will prevent a lot of crimes against millions of people around the world. That's a new concept. We are helping to put order in the world. We're helping to establish the law in the world.
You're staying with us not just for this half an hour, but for the next half an hour on World Have Your Say. So if you're watching on BBC World News and would like to speak to Luis Moreno-Ocampo live from The Hague, get in touch with us all the usual ways, and we'll keep on talking with him in a couple of minutes' time. Luis Moreno-Ocampo is with us live from The Hague, and we're going to be talking to him about any subjects that you want to raise. We're not just going to talk about his announcement that Colonel Gaddafi is someone he wants to see arrested. If you've got any questions about the work of the ICC, you're welcome to get in touch. He's live with us for the next half an hour. We've already heard from over 25 countries, so keep those calls coming in, and I promise I'll get through as many of the issues you raise as I possibly can. One other thing to mention, if you're tweeting, put the hashtag WHYS along with your tweet, and we'll be able to pick up everything that you're saying. If you want to call us up, the number as ever is country code 44 2070 83 72 72. Luis Moreno-Ocampo, thank you very much indeed for being with us.
My pleasure.
And we're going to get a couple of minutes of news and then we'll get straight back to you with all of the questions that are coming in. Let's begin with President Obama. He's holding talks shortly with the Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu in Washington, with the two men sharply at odds over how to advance the Middle East peace process. The Israeli leader has rejected a US proposal that a future Palestinian state should be based on the borders between the Arab-Israeli War of 1967. And you can see live pictures there from Washington, D.C. as I'm reading the story. We're expecting a statement in the Rose Garden of the White House from both men. Of course, as soon as they step out onto the grass, we'll bring it to you live here on the BBC, on BBC World News. Let's look at other stories. There have been more anti-government protests in several places across Syria. This footage appears to show protests in a suburb of Damascus earlier today. Reports also say Syrian security forces fired into crowds in the central city of Homs, while thousands have been demonstrating in the coastal city of Banias. Meanwhile, as I seem to say every Friday on World Have Your Say, thousands of Yemenis have taken to the streets to protest against the rule of President Ali Abdullah Saleh. Now, the president has called for early elections, saying he wants to end the bloodshed, but he's continuing to resist the idea of leaving office immediately. The president of TEPCO, which operates Japan's crippled Fukushima nuclear power plant, has resigned. The company reported huge losses of more than $15 billion following the earthquake and tsunami in March. Masataka Shimizu said he was taking responsibility for Japan's nuclear crisis. And Italian police have rescued about 500 migrants packed onto a fishing boat just south of the small Italian island of Lampedusa. The migrants came from sub-Saharan Africa. They were mostly men, but there were also 36 women and 9 children on board. Well, the first of you watching all around the world to speak to Mr. Moreno-Ocampo in this half of the programme is Jesse. He's a blogger on international justice and joins us live from New York. Jesse, what's your question?
Hi, my question for you, Mr. Ocampo, is I've just returned from the Middle East, which, as you know, is highly underrepresented at the court. Only Jordan is a member. I was gathering opinions about the court, and it seemed that most people were in favour of the ICC, but they just didn't believe that their governments would actually ratify the Rome Statute. I was wondering what you thought that concerned citizens in the region could do to persuade their governments to have a greater engagement with the court.
It's very interesting because around the world, Arab people living outside the Arab countries, they are sending information to us, trying to cooperate with us. But I think the Arab world is changing. And in fact, I believe Arab world is changing the entire world. Because, for instance, the people in Tunisia now are promoting that the government of Tunisia, the new government of Tunisia, is talking about ratifying the treaty. Egypt is similar. So I think Arab world is changing, and they will join the court very soon. More countries from the Arab world.
Jesse, do you want to respond?
Yeah, I agree that the opinions are positive generally, but there's also some skepticism because of elephants in the room, the Israeli-Palestine conflict, the invasion of Lebanon in 2006, the Syria situation there now. I was wondering if you feel like there's too much in the Middle East for the court to deal with. I know that there's just one prosecutor, you have 300 staff, but you have 6 situations before the court now.
No, I think, but that's a new concept. We are not, Nuremberg was just on the Nazis, but we are for the future. And then now citizens around the world are understanding this idea, and they are trying to promote justice in the world. I think it's beautiful, and I think it's not just about what the court is doing, it's that what this professor is talking, how Arab people are requesting. So that is a new debate. It's not just about power, it's about justice and law and respect. That's 21st century.
Jesse, thanks very much for joining us on World Have Your Say. If you want to read Jesse's blog post, go to IJ Central. You'll find that in any search engine. Let's pull up a message here from Mr. Ethiopia, who's been posting on the America blog. He says, how do these crimes differ, and the crimes he's talking about are in Libya, from innocent civilians killed during the Iraq War? If the ICC is charging one government under a specific criteria, it needs to charge all governments that same way. And we can also pull up another message from Piri, posting on allafrica.com, saying the ICC is a joke. and largely set up to prosecute African leaders and those who are not supporters of Western countries. For starters, even the US is not a member, nor is China. Well, a number of points there for you, Mr. Moreno-Ocampo, but it must be impossible for the ICC to really do its job properly when China, Russia and the United States don't buy into it.
You see this glass, half empty, half full? It's the same. I have jurisdiction in 115 countries. I cannot do things in other countries, but I can do justice for the victims in the 150 countries where I work, and I'm doing that. And then, are you against prosecute people who commit crimes in Congo? Are you against prosecute Joseph Kony, who was killing people for the last 22 years and always ignored? Are you against to stop the genocide in Darfur? No. You're in favor of that.
But
and
sir,
that's what we are doing.
surely, and so many people are making this point who are watching us now, surely justice needs to be distributed equally. If one person who lives on one street steals and gets caught and goes to prison, but the person on the next street steals and says, I'm not buying into this justice system, then everyone is left feeling that it's not fair.
Exactly, but it's not about the court. Because, again, my jurisdiction is the dark blue countries. I can do nothing beyond. The Security Council could decide that. So this discussion is a debate for the Security Council. They should debate why they are not referring other situations to the ICC. They have their own reasons, but I cannot expand the jurisdiction of the court. That's why these people who understand law has to be universal, and we are in the process to make universal this law in the world. And in the meantime, the key actor here is the UN Security Council. They can refer more situations to the ICC.
Well, there's a huge appetite to speak to you, sir. If you're just turning on your televisions, Luis Moreno-Ocampo, the Chief Prosecutor of the International Criminal Court, is live on World Have Your Say, taking questions from all around the world. I can see calls coming in from Oman, the Czech Republic, Algeria, Uganda, Bangladesh, Sweden, Ethiopia and Sierra Leone. Let's shift to Nairobi and speak to Caroline, who joins us live from there. Caroline, what's your question?
Hello, Mr. Ocampo.
Hello?
I'd like to know how much longer do we have to wait for the Ocampo 6 case to be resolved? We have our elections coming next year, and some of these people want to be president. We want to know who will be guilty or not, so that we know who to vote for. Thank you.
That's a very important question. Look, Kenya is a very peculiar situation because the violence was related with the election 2007-8, and we had to avoid the next election of violent. I always promise to do my investigation fast, and I present my cases. Now, as I always say, doing justice is a long journey. These people are people they have the right to defend, they have lawyers, and they have rights. We have to respect their rights. And for me, there are two different aspects. One is what happened in the court. That's where my responsibility. But Kenyans have in their own hands their destiny. So the elections in Kenya will be won for those who will be voted by the Kenyans. So I think the situation I cannot solve the political situation in Kenya. Kenyans should do it. I will do justice for the victims in Kenya, but the political situation should be solved by the Kenyans. So it's your challenge.
Caroline, a quick response from you.
I hear you, Mr. Ocampo, but we are eager to know who is guilty or not, so that so that the action that will be taken against them will be a lesson to the rest of the politicians who will be voting for the next year elections, so that we don't have a repeat of 2007.
I understand. I agree with you, but the judicial process has rules, and they have rights, and we have to respect the rights. But as you rightly say, Kenya, we need new leaders proposing to Kenyans a different political scenario. And I think it's more for Kenyan leaders than for the prosecutor of the ICC.
Mr. Moreno-Ocampo, thank you very much indeed for responding to Caroline in Nairobi's point. Lots more messages coming in as we're talking with Luis Moreno-Ocampo. We're going to squeeze as many as we can into the remaining minutes of the programme. We're going to take a break for a couple of minutes now, and then we'll be back working through all of your comments. Hi, this is Ross Atkins with you on World Have Your Say. We're live on BBC World News, and our guest for the entire edition is Luis Moreno-Ocampo, the Chief Prosecutor of the International Criminal Court. Let's shift through as many questions as we can. Let's pull up one here from Michael in Nigeria, who gets straight to the point. He says, what's been your most difficult decision?
No, each decision is difficult, and the worst is each time you make a decision, you decide to open investigation in Libya, then how to do it, how to manage this witness, how to protect this other. So each day you have more and more difficult decisions. That's why the job is so interesting.
Let's bring in Fatima. She's a Bahraini living in the UK. Hi, Fatima. What's your question?
Hi. My question is, since the ICC has recently accepted a case of war crime against the Bahraini government for their action, would they be able to carry this case until the end, especially that the Bahraini government is supported by the US and strongly by Saudi Arabia?
No, again, Iran is not a state party, so I have no jurisdiction in Iran. The only way to do it is if the United Nations Security Council referred Iran to the office. If not, I cannot do it. I have no jurisdiction there.
Fatima?
Okay, so it has to go through the UN first.
Yes, that's the point. Those who like justice, our intervention in these countries, they have to go to lobby or to discuss it in the UN Security Council. That's the way to do it. So last week was a demonstration of people, thousands of people from Sri Lanka, but they should go to the UN Security Council because they should open the door. I cannot do it myself.
Fatima, does that satisfy you? Is that an adequate answer?
Yes, thank you very much.
All right, thank you. That Fatima is Bahraini. Let's shift from a Bahraini to an Australian. Bob's on the phone from Queensland. Hi, Bob. What's your question? Hi, Bob. Oh, it sounds like we'll sort that line out. In the meantime, Sam, not his real name, in Khartoum, is watching us in Sudan, and he says, as a Sudanese citizen, what do you want me to do to get Omar al-Bashir arrested?
No, if you live in Khartoum, be careful, because I don't think you alone can do something. So do justice in Sudan will take time, because there are some problems, but I hope it's a matter of just timing. Right now, President Bashir is a fugitive, so he can do nothing outside Sudan, but inside Sudan he's dangerous, so he can kill people. So my recommendation to you is be careful.
But he's absolutely not a fugitive in Sudan. He's been able to travel to several other African countries, including Kenya, and just this week there have been further Air Force attacks on people in Darfur that the UN has confirmed. Your arrest warrant appears to have achieved very little.
No, I'm sorry. He's a fugitive president. He is not under house arrest. He's under country arrest. He cannot move. How a president of the country could be proud that he was 4 hours in Kenya or half day in Chad? This is not the president of the country. So it's a matter of time to arrest President Bashir. In the meantime, he's abusing of his power to keep committing crimes. It's a shame, but it's a matter of time.
It's worth adding, President Bashir
one day he will face justice.
President Bashir gave a newspaper interview this week saying the ICC was about politics, not about justice. Now, the good news is we can speak to Bob in Queensland, I'm hoping. Bob, can you hear me? And what's your question?
Yes, I've got you fine, Ross, and I'd like to come back to the topic of warrants yet again. I've noticed that through the years, the ICC has issued a lot of arrest warrants for serving politicians, but you don't have any effective way of enforcing those warrants without relying on locals and things like that. Can you consider your efforts to be a success if you can't enforce your own warrants?
But imagine in Australia, is a judge from Sydney issue an arrest warrant and the police is not implementing. Are you going to discuss this with the police or with the judge? So the problem is we are a court. We evaluate the evidence carefully, we respect the rights, and we apply the law. The implementation is a matter for the police, army, political leaders. And that's why it's complicated, because we are changing the rules how political leaders relate between them and negotiate between them. Now, we're telling them this is a limit. Those who commit genocide go to jail, cannot be your partners. So It's a change. It's a difficult moment. This idea is like to stop to smoke. It's a good idea, but the first week are difficult. And we are in the first weeks of this institution. Arresting Bashir is a huge challenge, but basically it's a challenge for the international community. How they put enough pressure to ensure that he's demoted and then arrested. It's their challenge, not the judge's challenge.
Bob, a quick response from you.
Well, yes, it just occurs to me that most prosecutors, most courts, do work much more closely with the law enforcement agencies such as the police. And I think that might be a big failing of the International Criminal Court, is that you operate in a vacuum and just depend on the goodwill coming from others.
Bob, thank you for that comment. Let's shift from Queensland to Paris. Our last guest today is Ali, who's a lawyer and a blogger. Ali, welcome to the programme. What's your question?
Thanks, Ross. Senor Ocampo. Greetings from Paris. A lot of commentators and writers have argued essentially that the ICC is a step back from its precedent war crime tribunals. And the reason is because under your tenure, essentially, there have been very few prosecutions and very few condemnations. I know it's young, and I've heard you made that argument before, but how do you respond to that? And do you have any regrets?
No, we're different than the ad hoc tribunals. We're working in different situations around the world. We just prosecute the leaders. All my cases, we prosecute the number one. So we are not prosecuting sergeants or lieutenants or sub-officials. No, we go right to the top. So difficult investigation, but we have 24 decisions adopted by the judges, and the final judgment is coming. So all this is happening in few years. So I think you will see this idea is moving ahead.
Ali?
Essentially, if that is going after number one, do you see a role as more or less symbolic, particularly
Ali, let me jump in here because I know we're not going to have time for Mr. Ocampo to respond, but what about you? Are you convinced that the ICC has proved its worth over the last decade?
I think a big difficulty with the ICC essentially is that it is limited to going after world leaders. And so I think in a large part of the world, in particular Africa and the Middle East, it's seen as highly symbolic. To what extent that's going to contribute to the world good is difficult to see. It's going to mean that Mr. Ocampo, and there has to be reform essentially.
No, I'm sorry. These crimes are committed by armies or militias. So if you stop Hitler, you stop the Nazi regime. If you stop the leader, you stop the army. If you put in jail the captain, you are winning nothing.
And on that thought, Mr. Moreno-Ocampo, we've got to leave it because we're completely out of time. Ali in Paris, thank you, and particularly thanks to you, Mr. Moreno-Ocampo, for joining us.
Thank you very much to connect me with people.
And thank you to all of you who've got in touch. We've had an extraordinary response. Over 50 countries have taken part. I'll speak to you very soon. Goodbye.
Наша интеграция.